People scale back to just one command destroyer, and then using that extra points to protect that command destroyer a lot better.
Balgon, Balgon, Balgon.
Hello everyone, I'm Rain and welcome to Streamfleet plus EVT introducing the Alliance Tournament. So with me I have Sutonia, moderator, and Alexi, who is currently not on camera, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Moderator, would you like to start?
Hey, I'm moderator, former Alliance Tournament commentator, team captain, and Alliance Tournament aficionado.
Sutonia?
I'm Sutonia. Used to be on the Hydra Reloaded team, not this year because I'm too busy with work, but I'm doing the commentary still with EVT, and I've been a commentator in the past too, as well as an analyst for EVT.
And Alexi.
Hi, I'm an AT pilot recently with Laserhawks. I'm also the stats analyst who gave you all the fantastic graphs last year if you saw them, and otherwise I'm pretty much just a massive AT and tournament nerd.
Well, thank you guys. So the point of the show here today is going to be introducing the AT. And I know we're going to be throwing around a lot of acronyms, a lot of jargon, and I know people generally don't understand the AT, so that's kind of what we're here for. We're going to break it down, make it simple for anyone, including newbies to EVE, as well as newbies to tournaments to understand. And so for the first part, we're going to go into a bit brief of the rules and kind of an introduction of what the Alliance Tournament actually is. And I believe we are going to throw that to Alexi since he is the one with the most information about stats and whatnot. Would you like to take that?
Fair enough. Yeah, so quick overview of the rules and what makes this different from...
Sorry to interrupt. Could you also go into what exactly is the AT? Maybe that's a better higher level to start, and then breaking it down to the rules.
Okay, so Alliance Tournament has been running now. This will be the 16th iteration. It's an annual tournament that CCP run, gathering sort of big alliances to put together teams to compete for prizes. Typically, these prizes have been the absolutely wonderful AT prize ships, which you see in the most expensive kill mails on Zkill, and generally just being pricey and shiny. But the tournament itself is really interesting because it's the closest EVE often gets to a fair fight, and it's got a lot of rivalries going back a long time.
All right, thank you. And I know you mentioned fair fight, but could you kind of break down, I would say, the rules of the AT? Because obviously any sort of tournament has rules, I don't want to say regulations, but has rules and sort of boundaries of, what players are and aren't allowed to do compared to, say, EVE on Tranquility. So could you break those down? Maybe, I know the rules have a lot of detail, so maybe I start at a higher level of like some of the basic things, and then we can get into some of those details later on.
Okay. Well, I had a whole thing prepared for this, of course, which we will see if it actually works out. The rules fall into two major categories, as you've said and focused on. The rules that try and make it a fair fight, because we're EVE players, we won't allow a fair fight if we can help it, so the rules try and make it so. And then you have rules that try and make it interesting for the viewers. That's basically, they try and guarantee explosions. To make things fair, you start with, you only allowed 10 pilots on either side. So these matches are quite limited. You can actually bring less than that if you want to, but you're pretty much limited by that. And you can only bring 100 points worth of ships. This is done by giving every ship a points value, from your sort of corvettes and industrials on 1 point, all the way up to pirate battleships on 23 points. Then when you're doing scoring in the matches, whenever a team destroys a ship, they earn points equal to its value. If you score 100 points, you've wiped out the enemy team, you win. Otherwise, there's 10 minutes for a match, and at the end of that 10 minutes, whoever has the most points wins. An additional...
Right.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, that's pretty straightforward. I know ships as points, I think, can get a little bit complicated, but as far as I'm aware, I think that's a pretty simple concept. But for those in Twitch chat, if you have questions or want Alexi or someone else on the panel to expand on topics, please feel free to speak up. But yeah, sorry, Alexi, continue on.
The other rule that's key about how you form your teams, especially this year, is you're only allowed one of any given ship. So we've effectively got what is the Highlander rule in a lot of other games of there can only be one of any given ship in your team. Once you've got that, and that hopefully means that we're going to have some fair fights, we've got to make sure they're interesting. The main things to do that are to stop people kiting and stop people just perma-tanking. Stopping people kiting is done by the fact all of the matches take place in a fixed arena. It's a 125-kilometer radius sphere around the central warping point. If you leave it, you are instantly explodified. It doesn't straight up kill kiting, but it means if you've got a slower team, you've got options with having long-range weapons or just maneuvering right to try and pin a kiting team up against the wall, so they can't just fly away forever in a straight line like a lot of nano gangs do. When it comes to limiting tank, on the other hand, there's a lot of things that actually end up coming together to do this. But the most important one is you can't just bring all the Logi ships that you want. You're allowed either two logistics frigates or one logistics cruiser. They can be Tech 1 or Tech 2, but basically you can't bring enough logistics that you could reasonably perma-tank. A pair of Logi frigs actually is not a huge amount of rep power, and a single Logi cruiser, of course, because it has the local tank, if it gets attacked, can be quite fragile, as gets proved in a lot of matches. You can't fit remote reps on everything else as well, which means you can't kind of try and spider tank with a set of battleships. Trying to get together through breaks and stuff. Next thing that limits the tank is you're only allowed Tech 2 modules and below. This is a fitting rule across the entirety of the Alliance tournament, which means, combined with the rule of T1 rigs only, ships are probably a lot more fragile than you'll see them on TQ. Especially things like recons as well. They won't have the insane sort of ranges for points and webs that you'd expect. And it kind of means you'll see ships doing more, or in some cases less than they do on TQ, but a more distilled form of their original roles, because you won't just see these battleships bringing blinged long-range webs.
Is that all of it?
Apologies, just distractions in the background here.
No, I just want to make sure because you paused. I don't know if you want me to speak up or if you're just taking a breather because you have a lot of information.
Yeah, there's a lot of information here, and there's a lot of points where it's meant to be noted as we're going to pause and chat about stuff. But no, there's one. Okay. While we're on fits, there's also a lot of things you'd expect to be banned kind of are. You can't have cloaks because it would be really silly if you came into a match and suddenly the entire enemy team cloaked up and just tried to sneak up on you around the arena. You will see stealth bombers anyway, though, because they're really effective in the format. Micro jump fields, the ones that you'll see on the Bushin command destroyers, they're also not allowed because you'd have just insane matches of one team tries to jump the entire enemy team out of the arena, and it's not too fun when everything's over in an instant. The other things that are specifically banned is Bastion modules get banned, because we kind of proved in AT12 that even with Marauders at the time being costed 26 points, so you basically really committed to bringing that. It was a huge part of your team. But with Bastion on it, it would win you matches on its own because it could tank through so much. Pirate implant ships get removed for the same reason. Basically everything that's OP, or everything you can think of that would be OP, is kind of taken out so things are more fair and reasonable. One of the things that gets taken out along with that is the Nestor, and all of the rest of the Concorde ships for other reasons, but the Nestor gets banned because it's the only subcap. Of course, the Alliance tournament is limited to subcapital ships only, but it's the only subcap that would allow you to refit your ships on the field, which would lead to some very janky things going on. And sort of the final thing to cover, final two things to cover all of the rules is you have special ships in EVE, of course. You have the Alliance tournament prize ships themselves, which are ridiculously powerful, and you have the flagships, which are a tournament-specific thing. both of these come into a sort of group of special ships, which you can only bring one of to any given round. But the flagships are interesting because they allow you to break the meta restrictions. And you will see the flagships being absolutely blinged to hell on everything they can. And I think that is where we will see, both in the ships that go onto the field and in preparation for it, a lot of mutaplasmided officer modules going to die this year because teams will throw insane amounts of money at these. The flagships, the rule is that you can field them until you lose them, and then they are gone for the entire tournament. They're also immune to bans, and that's the final thing. All of the teams have bans before the matches. You have 3 bans before each match, and it's alternated 1, 2, 2, 1, so teams sort of get to see what the other team is banning. You can try and avoid getting hard countered in the comp that you want to bring, try and force your opponents into a given comp. Basically, try and rule out some MOP stuff if you want to just see a slightly different match going on. There's an additional rule in the banning that when we get to the series at the end, you have the best of 3 and best of 5s, and you have the conquest rule coming in, which means if you win with a team, you can't bring those ships again, which will see a lot of interesting comps coming out at that pointy end of the tournament to try and play around to the conquest rules.
All right, so that's a lot of information. I was going to throw this over to both Suetonia and moderator. Do either of you have anything that you want to touch on that maybe Alexi didn't touch on, or something you wanted to expand on?
So, no, Suetonia, go ahead.
I was saying Lexi covered it pretty well. There was someone in the chat asking if Triglavian ships are allowed, and they are allowed, and they're actually at the Tech 1 point value, so they're actually going to be super powerful in this tournament. So just extra stuff that the Abyss is bringing. The new Triglavian ships are probably going to have a large part in teams, especially the Vedmak, which is costed at 4 points.
Yeah, so one of the functions of the Alliance Tournament Right is that it's EU's annual tournament right, and not only does it showcase the talents and capabilities of pilots as it's done for the last 16 events, it's also there to promote the game. It's something that's very publicly visible, and it's very much going to showcase things from the recent patch into the Abyss, and as such they've put the points values for the Vedmak and the Leshak at a level where teams are going to be very much inclined to bring them to the field. So we'll get to see a lot of abyssal ships and abyssal modules getting destroyed in this tournament.
To expand on that a bit further, the Triglavian ships are coming in at their T1 point, the value of the T1 ships for their class. They're being counted as though they were T1, though for all effects they're basically pirate faction ships. This means they're being approximately half the cost that they would be if they were being priced as the pirate faction, aside from the battleship, which still is about 25% less, which is a huge amount when you're talking about how many of these threats you can try and fit into a composition.
Sure. And to back up a little bit, so one of the things that's being done in order to make sure that people don't just bring 8 faction battleships, a Logi, and then a command ship for a Lynx is that there are point restrictions on each of these ships. So each ship costs a certain amount of points, and you're only allowed to bring 100 points to the match. So that way you see a lot of variety in the compositions and the types of ships that people bring, and you end up having a kind of rich and diverse pool of viable comps and setups to actually play with. And that's one of the things that, again, will feature these Triglavian ships because they're priced at a point value where you would want to bring them in a lot of setups.
I'm going to jump in and answer a question that someone had in chat. Kane asked when the Alliance tournament was actually starting. It starts the weekend of July 28th, 29th, so the Saturday, Sunday, and it goes for the following 3 weekends. I figured I'd address that verbally as well as in chat for those watching.
I guess we can go over some of the changes from last year to this year. So we were just talking about how points sort of and the forces you to bring sort of a diverse group of ships. But in this year, as opposed to last year we were able to bring 2 of any named hull. So for example, you could bring 2 Merlins, you could bring 2 Hawks, and you could bring 2 Harpies in a team. Whereas now you can only bring 1 of any named ship. So you'd only be able to bring, say, 1 Harpy, 1 Hawk, 1 Merlin in a team. And this is what we're dubbing sort of the Highlander rule.
Indeed, especially after last year, and we saw a lot of fairly homogenous compositions like the 8 BC core that kept turning up on these final weekends. This Highlander rule is going to mean you have to have a far more varied core, and you can't just bring... The BCs were kind of an extreme example of it, because between the 3 turret-based Navy battle cruisers, they're very, very similar ships once you start boiling them down to the fundamentals. You could have, within that pool, sort of 6 ships that all did exactly the same thing. In previous years, it's been even worse, however, and there were, way back when there was no restriction on how many of a given number of ship you could bring in, you would have teams fielding compositions like a 10 thorax rush. It's one of the famous ones, but I remember one from not too long. Oh god, I'm just stumbling over my words. Why did you get me on this show? Damn it! Not too long ago, which was 4 Griffins, which was just horrible to try and face, because 4 Griffins, you lose. It doesn't matter if you win the match; you have lost something trying to fight through that.
And I know we had a question earlier talking about meta, and I think these points and sort of these rules help really dictate the meta. Without getting too in depth of meta, because I know once we start doing that, we lose a lot of people, and we're trying to make this simple for viewers back home, especially newbies. Could you guys maybe sort of guess or speculate on what you think the meta will be this year?
It's going to be hard to predict, I think. I think what we'll probably see is, like last year, we saw very focused compositions. Like we had there was like 4 main compositions really. There was sort of like the battle cruiser comp, which mostly was 4 battle cruisers backed up with a Balgorn, a logistics cruiser, and then just support. We also saw like the quad, the like Octodad, the like 8 BCs composition later on, fielded by Hydra and Vidra. We saw like rapid life spam teams. We saw like drone heavy teams, mostly focused around like VNIs and Ishtars, with various other drone ships and support ships backing that up. And then we also, I think those were like the main 4 to 5 comps. Whereas now it's much harder to sort of build like a pure control comp, right? Like last year we saw Hydra have a team that had like 2 Rooks and a Chameleon, and then like just a bunch of DPS and support ships on that, and that team was like very focused built. Whereas now you can't really do that. Like you would have to do something weird like Rook, Chameleon, Falcon, and then you have like 1 Sacrilege and something else. And so I think it's really hard to build teams around a specific corp. I think, specific sort of comp. I think you now have to sort of build around a specific idea and have like different moving parts that can sort of shift around here and there. So it's going to change things quite a bit, I think. I think we'll see a lot more sort of mid-range comps, I guess, as well as sort of heavy top, smaller bottom, as opposed to last year, which was sort of just kind of like mostly BCs.
Indeed. From what we've been seeing in practices, especially so far, you're seeing a lot of comps that focus around 2 or 3 battleships at the top and then pretty much just flesh out with a support wing, or these comps that use a lot of the hacks, which with the new module, really powerful, and just sort of stack in that slightly lower mid-range than we had last year, but just have a lot of moderate threats across their team. The one thing I think we're going to see a hell of a lot of, though, is the Praxis, because it's pointed as a T1 battleship, which makes it the cheapest battleship, and then it has a points reduction because of the sponsorship this year. Sponsorships are sort of theming to the Alliance tournament that we will have every year. They come with an association that the prize ships tend to come from the sponsoring faction, and also sponsoring factions ships are cheaper within the tournament itself. So the Praxis, being the Society of Conscious Thought battleship, is coming in only 17 points, where most battleships are 19 or more. It's not an insanely powerful battleship in itself, but being that cheap, it just brings a lot of utility for the cost.
Any thoughts from you, moderator? I think moderator is doing something IRL. So
yeah, sorry. So one of my housemates is messing with me at like a really inopportune time. So basically, One of the things that's changed is that every year the rules get modified a bit so that the meta changes, so we don't see essentially, the same tournament twice. No one wants to watch everything happen over and over again. So one of the things that they did to change battle cruisers being the go-to ship every single time last year was they said, okay, nope, battle cruisers cost 1 million more points. You can't bring as many of them. And it's therefore going to, along with not being able to bring multiple of them, with the restriction for one specific hull in a comp, means that you have to have a bit more variety in varied ships. You have to have more of a support wing, or you have to have more, basically just a variety of setups.
Yeah, and I have heard some talk from some of my friends saying, I believe it was like the drone comp. A lot of times last year we saw a lot of drones. So T2 drones are allowed, not sentries, only T1 sentries, but because of T2 damage drones, last year we saw a lot of teams bringing drone comps. Whereas this year, I don't think it's going to be as prevalent since you can't have the double ships. You can only have one ship. So there's only like a small amount of ships that can actually bring and dominate with drones. So that was something I had heard.
Oh yes, particularly drone comps have been dominant in previous years due to, one, access to T2 drones, and two, the ability to field that very homogeneous core. You'd often see drone comps with sort of triple VNI, triple Ishtar as their middle of their composition. It would be just swarm your opponent with heavy drones, because all of those field heavy drones that do pretty much the same thing, and you just have these wave after wave of them. And that's just not something you can do this year, slightly because you've got a reduction in the power of drones from the ban on T2 drones, but also because you've just got to mix your teams up a bit more.
Yeah, CCP did that because they got tired of watching people sit on some of the micro jump drive beacons. And that's one of the things to bring up in the actual field, is that there are deployable beacons on the actual arena that allow you to jump 100 kilometers in any one direction. So what a lot of these drone teams would end up doing is they would sit on top of these beacons, wait for someone to get close, and then just jump away like an asshole and rinse and repeat. And the only way to stop someone from doing that was to lock them down and scram them, or to have something that could shoot out very far, like a battle cruiser. And as a result, it ended up in matches that weren't particularly entertaining. So they've gone for more kind of violent and aggressive setups to be pushed this year.
Yeah. So with that, I believe we've covered everything with the rules and sort of the introduction to the AT. So we're going to go to a really, really quick short commercial break, and then we're going to come back and talk about the teams and some of the history of the AT.
People scale back to just one command destroyer, and then using that extra points to protect that command destroyer a lot better.
Welcome back. Like I said, super short commercial break. So now we're going to start talking about some of the teams of the AT. And I know, I was going to say there's about 64 teams. I want to say has been the consistent number of teams in the past couple of years. And this year, teams are still able to sign up. So if you and your alliance want to sign up, definitely go ahead and do that ASAP, because I believe it closes at midnight UTC or Eve time of today. So we as EventT/streamfleet do not have the finalized list. I think at best we have one of the dev blogs that was about, I think I had 59 teams, so there were 5 slots left. So we have that, but we want to get a bit more into detail about some of the background of some of these teams. I was going to say, I know the winners last year were Vidra Reloaded. And I don't know, I was going to say, Suetonia or Moderator, would either of you want to talk about them, or did you guys have a format of how you want to talk about teams? since you guys are everyone here except me has actually flown on an AT team.
Sure, we can talk about Vidra Reloaded for a bit. So I guess they're kind of like a mismatch of some of the like old successful Russian Alliance tournament teams. Like they have like a bit of a mix from like Gorgon Empire, the Afterlife, Dark Side. So experienced Russian teams that have come in good places before, like, you know, top 8, top 4, as well as, you know, a few other like super known pilots like Nick and Noiser and Lucy Liu. Even though they're pretty new, like I mentioned, they do have a lot of sort of old talent, especially from the Russian scene there. And in Alliance Summer 14, they had a pretty decent run, but they didn't seem as sharp as they could be because they had like a few weird comps, like they had a Paladin comp and like dual curse comps. And they, you know, they lost to Exodus, which put them into the losers bracket. Then they got eliminated by NC Dot, which isn't awful because both of those teams are very solid teams. And in Alliance Tournament 15, they actually trained with Hydra Reloaded, which is one of the sort of fan favorite teams. I guess moderator can maybe talk about Hydra, but they were able to sort of go through the brackets. They didn't drop a game, so they came into the final a game ahead, and they were able to defeat Hydra in the final with Drakes and Drake Navy issues, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, I got to drop a some bars about that comp. Live on stream. They did bring Drakes in to the Alliance tournament, which is something I don't think anyone expected. But a bit more about Vidra. So, like Satoni was mentioning, one of the things that happens a lot is that the EVE tournament scene is different from esports in that it's not really structured to have seasons or leagues the same way. So what you end up seeing is a lot of churn between rosters, and a lot of these players individually weren't satisfied with getting so close to the finish line and the podium. So like Satoni was saying, the best players from different Russian alliances came together, made a super team. They had a good initial run, and then they, with the practice strength of Hydra, became a much better team that allowed them to end up winning the entire alliance tournament. Something that I don't think anyone really thought would happen. They were picked as maybe like a top 4 to top 8 team, but them winning the AT was really kind of a shock for everyone, I think.
So we know Vidra was number 1 last year, and number 2 was, you said, their practice partners Hydra. Same mod. Do you want to continue talking about Hydra?
Yeah, Hydra's got a kind of a hodgepodge of a lot of the former Camel Empire players and the original Hydra core, some of which have been just tournament players for the last forever, and have all had tournament success, winning events, getting lots of prize ships, going to FanFest. If you're a wormholer and you have had to deal with these rolling shuttles, it's because Camel Empire ended up winning those for Tranquility a few years back against Serenity. So these are players who, even from years back, have been playing in tournaments at a very high level, winning these events, and even winning some cash, actually, back when the New Eden Open was still a thing.
So lots of history with Hydras compared to Vidra. And then I know 3rd place was Laserhawks, and we have our own Alexi, who actually is a part of Laserhawks. Alexi, would you care to talk about your homegrown team?
Of course. Well, Laserhawks is a team that pretty much the Alliance existed as the corporation for several years, and the true history of that, going back into sort of lead farmers, is before my time. But we basically formed an alliance in order to compete in the AT, and came out last year as a complete debutant team. We had nobody who'd played in the AT before. I think we had one guy who had done practice with Goons about 3 years ago, back when they were kind of fielding an AT team. But we managed to sort of pull it all together, get a number of solid comps. We have an absolutely fantastic Logi pilot who it wasn't our first choice, but he ended up stepping in and turning out absolutely awesome. And we played our way through the winners bracket until we hit Vidra, who promptly knocked us on our asses, and Hydra did the next day as well. Not the next day, I think it was the next weekend. Gave them a really good run with an ECM comp against their Chameleon double Rook comp, but That was an incredible match, and generally we just had a really good debut AT.
So,
Yes. No, I was going to say the slide that was just shown had mentioned non-legacy teams. So, Alexi, as you talked about that, non-legacy as in was Laserhawks truly their first Alliance tournament? They don't have the history that Vidra and Hydra or, many of these other teams do. So, getting third place for, I want to say, their first Alliance tournament is actually super impressive. And moderator, what were you going to add?
yeah, I was just going to say, Alexi's team was one of the beneficiaries of definitely, even these tournament giants, they can get upset. So we saw in the very first round, Hydra basically, not deliberately threw, but they basically threw a match against one of the new teams, Tempest Calcif, and as a result, it shook up the bracket a lot and paved the way for a team like Laserhawks to make it all the way on their side of the bracket, which was definitely unique. We got to see some teams in the semis-finals, like Penna's Out, the Galente Factional Warfare Alliance, fighting in Placid, Black Rise, and even parts of Nullsec these days, go against a Wormhole Corp. And we haven't really seen Wormholers get really that far in the AT really ever since Verja Collapse and Hard Knocks were at their tournament peak years ago.
Yeah, so I was going to say, if we want to carry on to the fourth, I want to say the fourth returning team or the fourth place of last year would be NC. or Northern Coalition. I was going to say, I don't think any of you guys have any relation to them, but Suetonia, would you want to talk a bit about NC.'s history?
So Northern Coalition has been like a super strong team sort of since, I would say, like 2013-ish, where they have a lot of really rich players on their team, especially a few sort of people. They have like the remnants of Nully Secunda, which was a really good Alliance Tournament team in AT12 and AT11. In fact, I believe they actually came in second place in Alliance Tournament 12, losing to the Camel Empire in the finals. And when that team sort of collapsed, it got most of its core got absorbed into NC. And NC also is just naturally one of the sort of like a brother to PL in the fact that it's got a lot of really rich players, and there's also like a few sort of like bitter players from other Alliance Tournament teams that have sort of been taken into it as well. So they have a lot of they have like a deep sort of unique pool, on top of the fact that they have a lot of experienced players from various other Alliance Tournament teams.
Yeah, they've also got some players like Brett Bart Pirate, for example, someone who was a Alliance Tournament caster this year for Plus 10 Gaming this year in Nottingham, has been part of that team in the past as well. And so they've got some members who joined some of these tournament, veterans, and they built up a core, practice a lot, just ground out a lot of theory crafting, a lot of scrim time, and they put together a solid team. It takes a lot to come even in fourth place last year and the year before that, and they're hungry to get further than they've ever been before.
I know earlier, Maud, you had mentioned also Penna's Out. Would you want to delve a bit more into them? I believe they were also a, quote, non-legacy or a brand new to the tournament scene team. And I believe they actually finished top 8 last year, like just behind Laserhawk. So I don't know if they're 5th, 6th, or where they were in the top 8, but I do know they finished somewhere between 5 to 8.
Yeah, so when they lost to Laserhawks, that match determined which one of those teams was guaranteed to come in at least in third place and win 7 prize ships each of the cruiser and the frigate. So that was 14 prize ships. So that winner, right, was roughly like 3 trillion-esque, which was huge for a Wormhole Alliance even, or a Faction Warfare Alliance. So as a result, they got knocked down. They're a team that was relatively new to the scene. I don't think we'll quite see either them or Laserhawks repeat the level of success that they had, but they're definitely teams to look out for. They're, again, hungry to build upon their success last year, so I look forward to seeing where they end up placing and how they adjust to the new meta.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, besides NCDOT, which we've already talked about, I believe Penna's Out and Laserhawks are a few of the teams that actively, I want to say, people know outside the Alliance tournament. Teams like Vidra and Hydra, like they do stuff on TQ, but they're not known pretty much at all besides the Alliance tournament. So we're gonna go now to Tuskers, who also are more well known on the Alliance, more well known on Tranquility, as well as within the Alliance tournament, as they won AT14. If we can go to that slide. And Alexi, would you like to talk about the Tuskers?
Okay. Tuskers are really interesting. They are solid wormhole-based nanogang group for the majority on TQ. But they kind of turned up in AT12, and they have this really good record of they've only ever actually lost to the finalists. They got both of their losses handed to them this year by Hydra and Vidra, respectively. They got both of their losses in 12 and 13. No, in 12, they lost to the two finalists, and in 13, they only lost to Warlords of the Deep. 12, I cannot read Roman numerals tonight. Why? 14, they, of course, came out victorious, and we expected perhaps a more dominant run than they had last year. They only came in 7th in 80-15, but that was mainly down to bracket and hitting the good teams really quite early on, and the teams that we didn't necessarily expect to be good, or at least the way it was seeded, we didn't expect to be good. Hydra dropping into the losers bracket and also coming in as an unseeded team because of their year out from competition kind of messed up the bracket in terms of where the powerful threats were last year.
All right, awesome. And I believe we have one more slide left. That's actually Pandemic Legion, who, if I'm remembering this correctly, poor Apoth will scold me if I get this wrong, but I believe PL have won the most Alliance tournaments in the past, and so I believe they are also probably one of the more seasoned teams as they've been around, I want to say, since almost the beginning of Alliance tournament history.
So yes and no. They've got a lot of players who, especially this year, have had Casper, Blue Melon, Brainstraw, and a couple others go over. Some of the U.S. time zone players, and Blue Melon being one of the former captains of, or in leadership in Hydra, splitting with them actually last year as a result of some internal team drama that happened within Hydra Reloaded. So a lot of those tournament wins that Peel have had, again, they're years old, over half a decade in some cases or more. And more recently, they've had a little less success than just winning tournaments back to back to back, which is, of course, very difficult to repeat. This year, they're rebuilding a lot of their tournament core. I mean, last year, unfortunately, they looked just absolutely abysmal. This year, with some of the new talent they have, I think they can do a lot better than they have, and it'll remain to see whether or not they're kind of bomb out like they did last year, or if they'll be a real threat that can be poised to win tournaments like they did in the past.
I was going to say, Alexi, I don't know if I heard you start to speak up if you had anything to add.
I was just going to say, mostly because Apothony would hurt us if it didn't get mentioned, or at least sort of throw some kind of tantrum. They are still the winningest team. They turned up in I want to say 84 and did a lot of winning shortly after. They are the only team to have won more than 3 in succession. Bob won the first 3 Alliance tournaments and are the only other team to have won multiple Alliance tournaments, though part of that has been PL have been the only big alliance that has held the team together. A lot of the winners you see, like Tuskers, like Hydra, like Nully, the group that actually won the Alliance tournament has often, parts of it at least, gone on elsewhere and been a really successful team, but they haven't stayed under that same banner.
All right, thank you. And so those are the teams I know we have specific slides on, or info panels for the viewers back home. Are there any other teams you guys think that would be like good to bring up? Any sort of like unique teams? I want to say, I know Brave last year was like the Cinderella story. Any sort of teams like that?
I think it might be worth mentioning Exodus quickly. I think Exodus is sort of they're almost, I think they're on par with the Tuskers, maybe not quite as good as the Tuskers, but they are sort of kind of in that sort of area as like a good execution team that normally gets a top 8 position. I think I may be over exaggerating their ability by putting them next to the Tuskers a little, and I'm going to sound like an arsehole saying this, but I think that the Exodus are definitely a team that can potentially win prize ships in the tournament.
I think it's a fair critique. I mean, Tuskers is not really on Exodus's level. I'd say that Tuskers is significantly better in terms of their theory crafting and piloting, and Exodus is in a point where I mean, I used to be the team captain for them. I got them to 3rd place, and they're in a point where they more or less maintained their skill level and the level of competition that they've been at. They haven't really increased that or improved significantly. And as a result, I mean, just over the last few years, Tony, you can speak to this, I'm sure. The level of competition has just gone up year by year with more teams practicing in test open practices and the addition of Thunderdome. It's made the Alliance tournament as an event much more accessible to the players as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. Like, I think if you took a mid-tier team from like Alliance Tournament 15 or 14 and sent them back in time to Alliance Tournament 8, like they would win the whole thing probably.
Not even just win the whole thing; they would just dominate the entire event. It wouldn't even be competitive, really. That just goes to show how much time and effort teams are willing to put in to find the better setups and practice them, you know, week in, week out against other teams of their caliber.
Alexi, do you have any other teams you felt like you wanted to mention?
Nothing that massively springs out unless I really want to get into it. I have, unfortunately, the stats blog that never was. I have a lot of information written about every single team that took part in AT15. A lot of interesting things going on. I will give a quick shout out to Templis Calcef though, who bloodied the nose of Hydra and were one of the only teams to do so, and kind of like Penn's out showing that you have a lot of these quite skilled pilots coming out of factional warfare with good theory crafting behind them. They can do really quite well. And though Templis only made, I think their final seeding is 25, or it's bumped up with a couple of the teams that didn't come back, but they're certainly a team that could potentially break into the top 16, I think, this year.
Yeah, I mean, then you've got a little bit further down, but not that much. You've got some of these, what I like to call these kind of gatekeeper teams, these teams that are very much on the cusp of making top 16 or not. And that magic number, top 16, is important because what it does is it guarantees you automatic entry into the next event with seeding. So you get a preferential bracket spot that's to your advantage to progress further. These would be teams like Thermodynamics, now Barcode, you know, Test Alliance, please ignore. In the past, we'll see if they can improve their previous results. And then you've got even like Brave Collective, not a team that individually is thought to be tournament veterans or particularly skilled. They've had some impressive results last year. It's very difficult to argue with a top 8 finish.
So lots of teams out there that people need to be keeping their eye on then. And I know we've covered most of what we had set for this topic. So unless you guys have anything more to add, we can go into a Q&A. I know we do have some questions already for you guys, us as a panel to answer, but if Twitch chat has anything they want us to discuss or any sort of questions they have, I know we've kind of been going through them both in text and verbally as the show's been going on, but if you have any questions we missed or anything that you would like to add, please shout it out in Twitch chat. Otherwise, I'm going to just, because I'm the one fielding the questions. So otherwise, I will just go to my list. That is not a legitimate question. When is Lorraine versus Suetonia 1v1? No. I don't think Suetonia and I have 1v1. But if they are related to the Alliance tournament, I would prefer that. So I know one of the questions that has been asked in chat, as well as one we have here, is what do you expect from the Abyss expansion and how does that impact this year's AT? And we went through it a bit with the rules of how the Abyss and the new modules, the mutagen modules, affect the AT with flagship. But do you guys have any other input with how you think the Abyss itself would affect this tournament?
Yeah, again, kind of just what we mentioned earlier, those ships that recently were introduced with the previous expansion are certainly going to be used. They're too powerful for their point cost to just not use them. Another question, do I think Assault Frigates will dominate the meta? I don't think they'll be dominant in the meta, but they'll definitely be competitively viable. If you want to take something like a Jaguar or another assault frigate that's just very fast, very agile, and just rush it at someone to lock them down, and then use your assault damage control to, you know, survive long enough for your logistics to get in remote repair range of you, that's going to be very powerful. Using that defensively to prevent other ships getting on top of you is going to be a huge part of the recent changes. Again, things like even assault cruisers, they're going to be, you know, much more viable in the past. Previously, we'd only really seen things like Ishtars and some of the actual Alliance tournament prize ships get used, but now with their point cost and just the utility they bring, they're a lot more viable. Also, other cruiser hulls, like recons in general, are a lot better. Satonia, I know that you really like dealing with curses and, you know, rooks.
And there was a question from Grindel who asked, when is the AT this year? So it is July 28th and 29th is the first weekend, and then it's every weekend after, so the first 3 weekends then in August.
Indeed, though it's worth noting it's all going to be focused on the Saturday of the final weekend this year.
Yes, that is a very good point. So even T is running the production of the tournament this year, so there's also, I believe, a Nottingham, I want to say, get-together AT viewing party if people would like to go there. I don't know the exact details of that, but it will be done on the Saturday, which is the 18th, August 18th.
There will be beer and spaceship explosions. That's all you need to know. Just go buy your ticket now.
Yeah, the only other sort of thing with the Abyss expansion, I guess, we should kind of mention that the flagship rules have sort of changed a bit, and that there's no newts or normal webs anymore that can be faction or break the rules. Like normally with flagships, there are certain module categories that you can upgrade to Dead Space Officer or even beyond. If you use a mutagen on those modules, you can get them even more powerful. Unfortunately, CCP, because last year was Battlegrounds Online and it was a Serpentis tournament, and I think there was actually more Battlegrounds than the Blood tournament last year. So the Battlegrounds been dominant for a while. So CCP they took webs out of the modules that you could use, like break the fitting rules for. But there are a few modules that you can use Abyssal Dead Space mutagens on right now, and those are Warp Scramblers, which might mean the Barghest might come in. I believe with a Toby Webb, Barghest, and Lynx, you can get like a 41-kilometer scram if you're willing to try for that, which could be potentially pretty crazy. And there's also the only other relevant Abyss modules, I guess, are prop mods right now. I think it's prop mods and scrams really and active tanks, of course.
Yes,
which could also,
I think, is going to be the biggest thing this year. I went through every single fit for every lost flagship last year, and one of the most interesting ones I found was actually one that used storyline reps, because it managed to fit a massively neuting, lots of damage, but dual rep Balgon. It tanked the most out of almost any battleship lost in that Alliance tournament. I think we're going to see a lot more of this with Abyssal the mutaplasmids being able to change the fitting constraints on these modules. You can get these really tight fittings to work with even better modules on them, and we could end up with some really tanky flagships coming out because of it, particularly as we now have Marauders viable as flagships.
I know we've touched on this earlier, but for those who weren't here, could moderator, would you be able to expand on what a flagship is to maybe help those that just joined us?
Sure. So a flagship is any battleship that you designate as a particular ship that is allowed to use certain modules that are beyond the normal, Tech 2 restrictions. So you end up having faction, officer, and dead space versions of modules being put on these flagships. So you can get, say that you want to run a rattlesnake. You can put, shield boosters that are dead space or officer on there to give it more tank. You can put, faction launchers on them and faction ballistic control units to make it, shoot out more effectively, do more damage, and better drone modules to make your drones hit, harder, better, faster, stronger. And as a result, they're just, souped up battleships that ignore the ban restriction. Again, one of the things that I don't think we've touched on yet is that each team, since we've gone full MOBA with not being able to have more than one ship of each class, we've also decided that everyone gets 3 bans to counterpick against things that you don't want to see your opponents bring. So flagships get to avoid that rule entirely. So you can't ban them out, and as a result, let's say you have a comp that you really like bringing, but someone bans out that battleship. You can now bring your flagship through to avoid that ban, and it's a very powerful tactic and a very powerful ship that teams will use as part of their Alliance Tournament arsenal to bring them glory.
Thank you, Mod. And I know we actually, that was one of our questions too. You guys mentioned how the Balgorn has been strong in the past. What do you think this year with the Balgorn being gutted as a flagship? What do you think is going to be the next big up-and-coming flagship that people are going to turn to?
Well, Alexi previously mentioned Marauders, and I think the Golem and the Paladin, especially out of those, out of that set of ships, are probably going to be very powerful. Like I mentioned, I think the Bargis might be powerful with the right amount of pimp on a scram. You can get a very, you can get like 35-kilometer plus scram with like a reasonable, if we're talking like a good roll on a domination warp scrambler. With an unstable mutagen, that's a lot of control. Although it's not quite as good as the old Balgon, it's about as good as like an old like Toby Web Vindicator, which is pretty crazy. And I think the Lashak and the Praxis especially might also be very interesting.
That's what I was going to say. I think we're not going to see quite the same level of dominance. We had 37 Balgons picked last year. We're only 64 teams, 37 declared a Balgon. I don't think we're going to see that level of dominance, but I think the Praxis is going to be the sort of default pick for a lot of these teams because it's ridiculously cheap. It works in almost any comp you want it to because you can armor or shield tank it. And the ability to bring it past bans is going to make it a really nice choice for just, hit that button, Praxis flagship, make your life a little bit easier.
Yeah, and the Lashak, of course, doesn't really benefit as much as the other holes I mentioned. But again, because it's a Triglavian ship, I think is it 19 points? And the Praxis is 17 points, but for 19 points, you're getting sort of a pirate battleship in terms of stats with a few extra bells and whistles. And I think the Lashak is also going to be a sort of semi-high priority ban just because it brings a lot of control into the Alliance Tournament with the 4 utility high slots that it has.
I think given its power level, we're going to see a Lashak ban from any team that isn't fielding it, in honesty. Unless you're banning out the logistics and things get complicated. An effective Lashak ban, shall we say.
All right. So I don't think anyone in Twitch chat had a question related to the AT. If I missed it, please repost it. But I will go through my list. We've asked a lot of these. Oh, so I know there's a question on here about the Highlander rule or the rule with only allowed to bring one ship of its type. What do you guys? I said, well, there's some weird things about it. What did you guys have in mind? I'm not sure who posed that there. Is that you, Alexi?
I think it was, but I will touch on one of the slightly weirder things about it with regards to logistics frigates. Because in previous years, those have always been brought as a pair of logistics frigates. But now, of course, you can't have two of the same ship, so you can no longer have that twin Deacon or twin Thalia. If you want to bring logistics frigates, you're going to have to sort of mix and match with one Deacon, one Thalia, or I believe it's one Kirin, one Scalpel. I might be wrong here.
Yep. That's
Not
right.
like I fly small ships ever. Why would you fly them? It's much nicer to fly the cruisers. But that's going to lead to some very interesting things, and perhaps what the Highlander rule is doing overall is exemplified there in that you're producing more points where there is a certain kind of weakness on a team. Because you can't have a very unified team in the same way you could in previous years, you expose more weaknesses, at least on certain ships. So the Thalia, for example, it can rep through a lot more. A little bit of damage is less dangerous than it is to the Deacon, which can tank through a bit more straight on damage. But it's still got, each of them has their strengths and weaknesses, and if you can exploit one weakness, it gives you a way into taking the team apart, which is what Highlander, I think, will do overall.
Yeah, it might also be worth mentioning that it's going to be kind of weird to see like how control teams do, especially ECM, because in the way you deal with ECM teams generally when you're theory crafting is to try and have as many of the same race ships as possible where it is where you can do that. So very often you'll bring like stealth bombers that are the same race as your logistic cruiser, for example, because what teams do when they're picking ECM, racial ECM for their comps, is that they gamble based on what they think the enemy is going to be bringing and based on their own bans. For example, if you banned Guardian, you might take away a few of your Omar jams and put more Galanti jams on. And normally you're not going to gamble like, oh, I'm going to bring all Kodari jams, because if anything aside from Kodari comes up, you're fucked. But you would maybe say, okay, out of our 10 jammers, we're going to lean slightly towards Kodari and bring sort of 5 Kodari, 3 Mimitar, 2 Amar or something if you banned, like Mimitar and Amar logistic cruisers or something like that. Whereas now control teams are definitely weaker because you can only bring the one comp, so you can't really make like a dedicated control team. You can't bring like, the double Rook Chameleon team that Hydra were bringing in the past. You can't do like double Blackbird, double Griffin style teams. But because teams are not going to be able to bring racial uniformity nearly as well in these Highlander teams, ECM might be a lot more powerful just in general. Like if you just have a Blackbird, like a stock Blackbird, that says like one of each racial jammer on it, it might be a lot more powerful than before. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see, does ECM get worse or better? I think like the sort of solo unsupported Blackbird will probably be a lot stronger, but like dedicated control comps are going to be a lot harder to be made practically. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Right.
So I mean, one of the things is that we're not exactly proponents of racial oppression here at Streamfleet or EVT. A question in chat actually is, has anyone ever solo multi-boxed in a tournament match? And the answer to that question is actually yes. Someone made a tournament team called The Box years ago in a tournament in Eden Open, which was one of the prize money ship tournament events where a CCP offered up $25,000 as a prize pool. Someone entered 10 ships by themselves in an event, and I actually was one of the first people to bet on this match back when betting was a thing in tournaments, and I made like 10 billion in IS just betting like 30 million against them because I knew there was no way they were ever going to win anything. So easy money, unfortunately not a good tournament strategy.
And with that, so I know ISD Kiara says that it has been in the past, but it's against the rules. The thing is that with it being against the rules is you are only allowed to fly on one team. So if you, say, have multiple characters on different AT teams, I believe you can get in trouble doing that. But as far as I'm aware, I think you're still able to multi-box as long as you're not breaking like terms of service or EULA and like input broadcasting or anything along those lines. We also have a question. What?
As long as you're not doing anything sketchy like evading bans or logging on multiple alpha accounts to do it, there shouldn't be any restrictions against that.
Yep, for sure. And then I know RJ asked, He'd like to ask whether we know the average explosions per match, we as a panel, and if we could take a guess at whether the average will go up or down. I want to say, Alexi, would you happen to know that answer?
I can give you it in 1 second.
Okay.
Well, while he's getting the stats, I think the average number of explosions is definitely going to go up. But I think we're going to see a lot less clean matches, like clean sweeps, than we saw in previous tournaments, just because the nature of it's going to be a lot more sort of mid-built teams that are rushing into each other. There's going to be like less like pure control comps. I think it's going to be a lot more like, you know, at least like even like a dominating win is going to be like 2 to 3 ships die from the team that dominated.
And then I know Grindel has asked if there's been any news on prize ships, and we have confirmation from Guard that there are prize ships. And then additionally, I believe there was a stream from CCP a couple weekends ago that talked about, it seemed though as though the prize ship was going to be a Society of Conscious Thought mixed with Triglavian sort of prize ship, but other than that, like we haven't seen any sort of graphics or stats or even like the ship sizes. So if it's going to be a cruiser and frigate like in years past.
A bit more on that whole explosions per match thing. Tonya, you can speak to that, having been like a practice partner I played against previously in tournament preparedness. I remember, you know, especially in previous tournaments where you had 12 people on each side, it was very difficult to, you know, keep everything alive. A lot of things would run at each other and try to pin each other down, and that was really fun to watch. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that come back in the tournament meta. That will definitely be a little bit more entertaining and diverse than just having 10 battle cruisers or, you know, Balgorns and battle cruisers go up against each other. What's your take on that too?
Yeah, I think we're gonna see, yeah, like you mentioned, just gonna see like more sort of back and forth games as well. Like a lot of the matches in the Alliance Tournament 15 were pretty cool, but there weren't that many sort of matches where you knew sort of who was winning after the 2 to 3 minute mark. Whereas in a lot of sort of the old 12 pilot matches, there were a lot of matches that sort of one team was winning, but then the other team started coming back, then the first team was winning again, and then the other team like came back at the end and things like that, because like 12 pilots was just gave you like so many more possibilities with things like E-War. There's a lot more sort of dedicated support pilots and things like that, and definitely more stuff that could make or break a match.
Actually, I feel real bad for the people who actually have to go in and cast these events, because with a lot of the seesawing of these things, it can be really interesting to have to, you know, switch to, oh, that ship's dying over there, that ship's dying over there, instead of being like, okay, I know how this match is going to go. I can pretty much predict what's going to go on after minute 2, and to see a lot more variety and not just snowballing, teams being able to have kind of a comeback mechanic, especially with damage building up from these neutral Galavian ships charging up. It's a bit of a comeback mechanic, and it'll be really entertaining to see how that pans out.
11.97 is the average number of ships that died in each match of Alliance Tournament 15.
So I'll round that up to 12, and then we can see if more than 12 ships average this coming AT. See how many more explosions we can find.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to be more than 12 this year.
Indeed. Though the survival rate last year was slightly under 40%, so no, that does check out. There weren't too many short man teams, and I don't think we're going to see too many short man teams again this year.
Yeah, there still aren't many. There's a lot less reasons to bring Tinker setups than there were last year, so I don't think we're going to see them, especially since you can't bring duplicates. Normally these Tinker setups, they're on-demand teams that, oh, I guess I should probably clarify what a Tinker setup is. Generally it used to rely on sort of a super tank to strategic cruiser, the T3 cruisers, but since Alliance Tournament 14, you haven't been able to fit them with remote repairs any longer since they rebalanced them. You just can't bring the support subsystem on the T3 cruisers, I believe. Or I think you can bring the support subsystem, but you can only bring the links. You can't bring the remote repairs on them. So they're generally not that much useful than bringing just a command ship, like, or a battle cruiser like the Gnosis instead. but the only sort of tinker that we really see is the Atana from like super high-end teams, and that was normally backed up by very specific ships. Like the Hydra team last year had a comp called Purple Mistress, which was like Atana, 2 Widows, and then a bunch of support ships like 2 Manticores, etc. Since you can only bring one of each ship now with the Highlander rule, like there's no way that you would bring that comp with just 1 Widow, and you can't compromise any ship in that sort of setup. And I think that's going to be true for any other sort of pseudo tinker that people try to do with something like a Basilisk or a Guardian or whatever you would try to do with it. I don't think it works outside of the Atana very well, and so I don't think we're going to see tinkers at all, even from the super high-end teams using Atanas now.
And I was going to say, I know we have Sergeant Nugget in the chat saying he's very new. So definitely tune back at the beginning of the show because we went through everything really high level. Here's a little bit more detail. Obviously, you have to have that background. But the last question, and I think I want to say we maybe have touched on it in the Twitch chat, but the question is, what does a Society of Conscious Thought sponsorship mean for the future sponsorships of the Alliance tournament?
All right,
Well,
so, do you want to take this, Mod?
No, you should. I should stop cutting people off in general. This is all you, Suit.
Well, we've seen we've seen like pirate faction sponsor tournaments since Alliance 11, and I guess you could say like the sort of Navy factions have kind of sponsored tournaments from even from the beginning, because they've always had like Alliance Tournament prior ships from different races. At least since Alliance Tournament 7, I believe, with the Freki and the Mima as rewards, which I guess you could say was Mimitar, and then Galantia was ATA, etc. And recently, since the Blood Raider tournament, Alliance Tournament 14, we've seen a small point reduction on all of their ships. I think it's -2 points. So, for example, an Ashimu would cost 2 less points in the Blood Raider tournament than all the other pirate races. And in this year, it's Society of Conscious Thought, and of course, all of the Society of Conscious Thought ships are 2 points cheaper than all of the other Tech 1. Since Society of Conscious Thought is actually a Tech 1 power level, they're generally considered Tech 1, and that's how much they cost generally. They're all -2 from Tech 1 cost, so they're going to be pretty efficient. Generally, sponsorship means that that's the sort of prize ship that's going to be rewarded, and also there tends to be incentives in terms of point cost reductions to bring ships from the sponsor.
Right, so one of the things to kind of explain a lot of the history and some of the ongoing events in the AT is that every year there's been either a pirate faction or an empire that's hosted the event. So in the very beginning, we had empires that hosted these events. So we had, an Amar AT that was going to be losing. It's the Malice and the other AT ship that I can't remember because it's awful. And Vangel, yes, that one, the one that no one ever uses because it's terrible. And then they've gone all the way through all the actual Empire factions. They've gone through all the pirate factions. The only one they've actually not done as of yet is the Mortis Legion, and that's because they don't have to. They already have AT ships in the game, so don't worry about it.
What about Sisters of Eve?
The Sisters of Eve too. They're not one of the pirate factions, but I would like to see some Sisters of Eve ships. That would be pretty cool. I think we would all look forward to that.
The only slight disappointment is if they get a points reduction, it doesn't really matter because there's no way anyone is going to get to bring a Nesta.
Yeah, so the Nester is excluded from the Alliance tournament. I believe it is the only subcap that's not like a mining ship or a
There are 5 ships that are excluded. There is the Nestor, and then there's all the Concord ships. The Monitor, yeah, the Monitor, of course, would be fucking boring to watch. And then the standard Concord ships are just a bit too OP.
Yeah, so the Nestor specifically, the reason it's OP, one, it's the only remote rep battleship. I think it's the only one that gets a bonus to reps, excluding the Leshak, which just came out. But many people use Nestors to refit, and obviously if you are going into the arena and then, say, refitting ECM, that's not really in the spirit of watching things explode, so that is why CCP has opted to ban it.
personally, my favorite bit about if you brought Nestors is if one of your pilots loses their ship, they can board a shuttle that the Nestor has brought for them and fly around the arena annoyingly.
That would be terrible. Are shuttles allowed in the AT?
I don't
No,
believe so.
they're excluded on the list of allowed ships, so they're not something that anyone's ever brought because you can't.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. But so those are all the questions that I had prepared. Unless chat has any last minute questions, I believe we are going to do a wrap up. So I will pause there and do some shout outs. Actually, do you guys want to do your shout outs first? Do you guys have any? Moderator?
Shout out to, of course, Streamfleet and CCP for hyping up this event. I look forward to seeing, all 64 teams in the event and where we end up going with this team bracket. I look forward to that getting released, so should be good.
Sutonia?
I guess I'll shout out to Plus 10 Gaming and Streamfleet. There's going to be a few more streams like this. With sorry, there's like a car driving past my window. We're going to have like more streams. I think we've got one on the 8th of July, which is in 2 weeks. I think that every 2 weeks from then on until the tournament starts, and it'll be every week. There'll be a stream like this from Streamfleet, just like covering various topics. So shout out to them, and also just shout out to the Plus 10 Gaming guys like Mash, Bay for organizing all of this and all of the talent and staff on the Plus 10 Gaming team, such as Alexi and all the other cool dudes like Ivica, etc.
All right, Alexi, do you have any shout-outs?
I'm going to have to give a big shout out to Ella Lanham, who is my team captain and who is absolutely fuming and rage pinging at me at the moment because I'm not at practice. But also a genuine shout out to Zoo, who is our AT pilot and our fax at Laserhawks, and deserves a shout out whenever he can get one.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to run through shout-outs. Obviously, shout out to Equalizers. He's the one behind the scenes. This is not me running the stream. I'm simply sitting on Skype and Discord, and he's doing all the stuff in the background. And also shout out to Miss Moses and Raiden, who put this together, as well as La Loca from the EVENT side. I believe there was their collaboration to run the show. As Sutonia mentioned, we are doing another show. I believe it's 2 weeks from now. So July 8th, at same time, 1900, we will be here. I don't exactly know who we is going to be. I don't know if it's going to be the same folks here or if we're going to have different people come in and talk, but we will definitely be doing more Alliance tournament shows. And then as well as, I know Raiden linked it in the chat, there is a Streamfleet event actually going on. He copied that. So if you guys want to kind of see the streamfleet.org link, I will link that for you. And then as well as the Plus 10 Gaming or the EVENT as so Plus 10 is sort of this higher umbrella. EVENT is the EVE related aspect of Plus 10 Gaming with Bay and Nash and many player run tournaments, but I will link their website here as well. And then the last link I'm going to post is actually CCP's very own link about the Alliance tournament with rules, sign up. Sign up does end at the end of the day, which is why we don't have a full list. So if you suddenly have an interest for it or want to try it out, definitely feel free to sign up. The worst that happens is CCP says no, and you don't really lose anything from it. But those are all of my shoutouts. So thank you everyone for stopping by. Thank you CCP. Special thanks to moderator Sutonia and Alexi for joining me. I hope you guys all have a great day.
People scale back to just one command destroyer, and then using that extra points to protect that command destroyer a lot better.
Balgon, the Balgon, the Balgon.